morning, everybody. Welcome to the Denver Art Museum. We're really pleased to welcome you to our conversation about Wild Things, the art of Maurice Sendak. I'm Stefania Van Dyke. I'm the Associate Director of Interpretive Engagement here, and I'll be moderating a conversation with these three fine people here who really put this show together and were the brains and power and soul of the exhibition. I'll introduce Jonathan Weinberg, who is the Curator and Research Director at the Maurice Sendak Foundation. Lynn Caponera, who is the Executive Director of the Maurice Sendak Foundation, and of course Christoph Heinrich, who is the Frederick and Jen Mayer Director of the Denver Art Museum.
I introduced Stefania Van Dyke, who is interpretive specialist, actually the boss of all interpretive specialists here at the museum, and was as well a very fine people who helped putting the show together. So Stefania's impact in this show is amazing.
Thank you. Before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge that it is Yom Kippur, which is a very significant holy day for the Jewish community. So we really appreciate all of you who are here today, whatever your religious or cultural affiliation. So thank you for being here. I think we can just launch right into some questions. I wanted to ask you all, really, but Jonathan and Lynn, can you talk about your relationship with Maurice Sendak? How did you know him, and how did you come to be in charge of his foundation?
I lived in the neighborhood that Maurice moved into when I was 11 years old. My brother Peter was actually the caretaker of the property that they bought, and he just stayed for 6 years. I came in and lived there when I was 19, but I started to really work and know Maurice since 11 on, and was sort of just always hanging out there, because not because he was Maurice Sendak, but because he had puppies. And so I just, and then he gave me a job to watch the puppies, which I thought was okay. So I was with Maurice for about 45 years. So it's almost a long, lovely relationship.
And maybe I can add from what I heard before, when Maurice needed a model, then she was there. So when he needed to draw a foot, Lynn said, well, I had a foot, he could draw mine.
And there's a sketch, just spoiler alert, in the exhibition. There's a beautiful section about the Nutcracker, and Lynn served as a model for some sketches of Clara, so you'll see that.
Not for the Nutcracker, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, not the actual Nutcracker.
Not the actual Nutcracker.
Oh, right.
Okay, all right. Jonathan, what about you?
Yes, yeah. Well, let me just, we're just, since we're still on the Lynn topic, I mean, really, Lynn helped Maurice work. I mean, on so many different levels. So, in a real way, there wouldn't be a lot of the work that's in the show if it wasn't for Lynn, because he was a very complicated person and really needed an environment where he felt safe, and Lynn did that for years and years and years. So it's really important to say that. I knew him since, I think he actually met me when I was a baby, but I remember meeting him when I was 10 years old. My mother was best friends with his partner of 50 years, Eugene Glynn, who's a psychiatrist, and they grew up in the same town in Passaic, New Jersey, where I was born, actually. And so, as I say, I met Maurice when I was 10, and an extraordinary thing even then was how he would talk to a 10-year person like they were an adult. There was no sense of him talking down to me, and he was more interested in talking to me than the people at this party. It was some kind of birthday party, and I actually have a drawing of a lion that he did, because particularly if you were a kid, if you put a piece of paper in front of him, if you were smart enough to do that, and a pen, he would just start drawing just because that's what he liked to do, and then you would try to steal the drawing or make sure that you could keep it. Anyway, so, and then as I grew, my parents died when I was very young. My father when I was 6, and my mother when I was 15. King Grizzly Bear is actually dedicated to my mother. And so Gene was really like my father, and I think of Maurice as my uncle, and Maurice gave me my first, I'm a painter and art historian, and Maurice gave me my first watercolor set. And somewhere, I guess, there's a painting that I did of Maurice. Yeah. So, so that's a painting that I did of him. Anyway.
Well, I met Maurice Sendak through his book, Where the Wild Things Are, when I was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 years old. And in my neck of the woods, it was called Wo die wilden Kerle wohnen. So there's a German translation of this book, like there are more than 40 other translations by now. And then I met him again when my kids were about that age, and I was reading to them, in that case, Where the Wild Things Are, and not Wo die wilden Kerle wohnen. But then the third time I met Sendak was when the Columbus Museum of Art sent us a proposal for a wonderful show they were preparing with the Sendak Foundation, and the title was Wild Things Are Happening, right? And we went through, in our little group here in the museum, we went through this proposal, and I was immediately smitten. And I did not know much more than Where the Wild Things Are. Of course, I knew the name, I knew the book, but suddenly I realized what a deep, what an exciting, what a wonderful work that is. And if you flip through the slides, there's the book cover for the book about sleep. Can you just get to this? Because that was one of the really outstanding images, nightmare for a cover for a book by Bill Hayes, Sleep Demons, where immediately I sensed, I mean, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I sensed there's a lot of relationship here to old masters, to Goya, to Henry Fuseli, as you can see here. And I think as an art historian, and an art historian with European background, that was something as well that was really exciting for me to see how he, in a lot of his works, really went back to the old masters, to the artists of the 19th century that he cherished, and found ways to update them and to make them contemporary and relevant.
Yeah, another example here, since we're talking about artists from history, from the older times, Winslow Homer example as well. And so he was a collector, correct? Can you talk about that, fine art and lots of other things?
Yeah. I mean, there's a wonderful interview in the exhibition went right after Maurice did Where the Wild Things Are, and you can see the whole thing on YouTube. And even there, you can see his little studio, and you'll see that there's a Winslow Homer. These were engravings that were in newspapers, so it's a kind of print that, was printed on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, in a certain way, the books are prints too, which we like to point out in the sort of final artworks. But anyway, Maurice at that time had postcards and some original art, but as he, of course, became more successful, he was able to buy more expensive art. But he talks about art of the past for any particular project as a kind of, what he said, talisman. So when he started a project, he would focus on a particular artist or group of artists, and they would inspire him, and he would freely, he would say, steal from them. He had he had faith that his own style or his own expression would come through even more powerfully as he emulated art of the past. And he had this great belief in trying to almost commune with art. He often would say that art, like Mozart or Blake, was his salvation. It was almost for him a kind of religion, I think. And I think it's one of the things that makes this exhibition different when we started at Columbus is that we wanted it, first of all, to be in an art museum so that people would recognize, because if anybody here is an artist and went to art school in the 60s or 70s, you'll know that illustration was always talked in a very belittling way, because abstract expressionist illustration was old-fashioned, it was formalism and all that was going on. But I deeply believe in that these artists like Michelangelo, Sistine Celia's illustration, right? So we wanted to emphasize that, and also we wanted to bring out not just that Maurice is connected to his imagination and to his childhood, but that he is, that he was very good at inspiring himself, like not just sitting around waiting for inspiration to come, but to see the whole history of art has, like dreams itself, like a place to go when you don't know what you're going to do, and getting you to go to the next level. Yeah.
And he didn't go to art school, so I think it was also his way of teaching himself. So he was a fantastic teacher and a fantastic mentor as well, to people in the neighborhood even. And he'd bring people into his house and teach them about his art collection. And it was just this very sort of natural thing. If you wanted to go see, something that by Valetone, he would bring you into the house and show you stuff in the house. So he's a very generous man with his art and his knowledge of picture books and art in general. So.
I think the sense, and you get that sense in our show as well when you're in the first few rooms, is if he would have set his mind of becoming a portraitist or a painter or something else, he would have been as well exquisite and he would have been an outstanding artist. But very early on, and maybe already as early as when he was a kid, he realized that he loved books and that book was his form of art, that everything that you can pack between the cover of two books, including the end paper, including the cover, things that he cared very deeply about, that this was his medium. And the book art is probably the easiest or most precise word for it, was really his medium. And that's the sense that you get in the show. And even later in the 80s, when he does scenography for several operas, it almost feels as if he creates these huge pop-up books in which then singers and actors can act and move. And they still have almost formally this layering. They still have a lot of the sense of his books. In the 80s, at least in Europe, stage settings were very usually abstract, very architectural, very three-dimensional, and he does these pages, these layers, and almost as in Baroque theater, these different curtains, which play an important role for it. And then he goes back to books again.
And you can kind of reverse that, because the books often have this very compressed space that's almost like a stage set, and that gets more and more true as he's doing stage sets. There's the kind of back and forth. They kind of, or you take his pop-up book, Mommy, which is like opening up a theater, So there is this wonderful back and forth. When you go, because people often ask me, well, what makes us. So one of the things that's really unusual, but Lynn and I didn't realize it when we were growing up, because Maurice made it sound like all illustrations do this, is that he worked in these multiple styles. He didn't, he went from one style to another. So the same artist who does The Hole is to Dig, or Where the Wild Things Are, does Outside Over There. And Christoph is so good about this, works in cross-hatching, or has a style that's much closer to a kind of cartoon style or comic strip style. But then there are certain things that are so Sendakian. So I think you see this the most when he's emulating it in the Night Kitchen. Wonderful artist, Winsor McCay. And we have works in the show that he owned from Winsor McCay's comic strip. And Winsor McCay story is about little Nemo who dreams. He goes to bed every night, and he has these incredible dreams, and the spaces are totally Baroque and wild and three-dimensional. And Maurice totally emulates that style, but in his books, it's much flatter, And Mickey, who's in a little plane, this sort of dough plane, he always flies in front. He never flies in and through and in deep space, because for whatever reason, Maurice didn't like really deep space. Where the wild things are, the figures and their rumpus and all that, they're happening almost like a freeze, right? You know, they all happen sort of in the front. And I think that's really, also really big feet. That's another thing. You can go through the whole show and you'll see that everybody has gigantic feet. Yeah.
Sorry.
Talk about Mickey Mouse.
First of all, before I talk about feet, I just want to say that the way Christoph has and Stefania have designed the show, it really, really tunnels down right on what Maurice would have loved, is that it goes right back to the book. You'll see all the artwork, and then down under the artwork, in like a lighted case that looks like it's a crown jewel, is the book, because Maurice always felt that the actual printed book was the final piece of artwork, that everything else was the tool to get to the book. You know, he gave his life to books. He literally felt that books were his salvation, that if he didn't create a book, and picture books in general, that the importance of picture books, the importance of a kid sitting on a parent's lap and turning the page and feeling the kid sort of sink into them, and that the rhythm of their voice. He really felt that it was like a food, that they were nurturing your child by reading them a book. And I think that carries over to when you're an adult, because you give these books to your children and you're really sort of passing on your feeling and how much you care about them through books. But feet.
No.
Just to finish what he was going to, is that Maurice's proportions of Wild Things are based on a toddler. They have like big feet, and also on Mickey Mouse, who's also based on a toddler. They have big feet, they have a big head, they have a kind of a chunky little torso, and they lumber around. So it goes right back to why children are so drawn to these characters, because they look like them, you know.
Mm-hmm. Just one thought when you talked about the books. So the final artwork is the book. And I feel that is incredibly reassuring and as well empowering, because everybody can own a book. And by the way, our store is really good at that show. So don't miss that, and spend some time there. There are lots of books that you can take home, lots of original artworks, as we hear. On the other hand, Maurice Sendak was always very meticulous, and I think as well frustrated that the printing quality, at least in most of his time, never reached the quality of the originals. And that's why I'm incredibly proud. Okay, printing quality is much better these days, but still, there's nothing like seeing the original artwork for Where the Wild Things Are, because it is so subtle, it's so rich, it's really like jewels in the saturation of the color, in the subtlety of the tones that are there together. And I'm incredibly grateful that these two guys allowed us to show the whole thing. So it was never showed before. All of the illustrations for Where the Wild Things Are, and here in our show you can admire all of them in the flesh, and then go to the shop and buy maybe the book if you don't have it.
But this is, you're getting like this love fest here, but when we were conceiving, so we like to say that, it's a big responsibility. We both love Maurice and Jean and everything, and we're surrounded and still in the place that we grew up with, and we feel like, we feel like we're like priests, telling you the religion of Maurice Sendak, and the hope of the retrospective, in a sense, in organizing that, would turn on people and get them to understand what, and I never use this word. Christoph is saying that he rarely uses it, but Maurice was a genius, so that, and that's an incredible thing. And then to have somebody like Christoph totally get it, like he didn't just, say, oh, I'd like to do this exhibit and it would be great, good. he's kept coming to see us, and choosing.
Because it's so nice out there, as you can see here on this
The
picture.
original show had like 300 things, and he wanted, I think if the rest of the staff didn't stop him, the show would have been in here also, He just came coming back, and we're like, you really want that, Troy? You sure? And then the thing is that then when we saw the show, which is one of the most beautiful shows that we've ever seen.
Of any show, not just Maurice.
We understood this is why he wants this drawing. This is why he wants the tiniest little drawing or the biggest thing. It just all makes so much sense. And that's what we wanted, because we're learning. We learn from you. And from you, and you working with him and creating.
You need to know the Sendak Foundation was established after Sendak's passing in 2012, and Sendak must have been a bit of a hoarder because he never threw any piece of paper away that he had scribbled on. So you find in the estate these, and I probably barely scratched the surface of it, but you find these thousands
We didn't
of...
show you the other house.
You find these thousands of steps towards the final book as well. And you see, and that I think is so interesting and wonderful, you can sometimes look a little bit over the shoulder of a great artist. So you see some early drafts, some early sketches, for instance, for the first successful book, A Hole is to Dig. And in the show, I think there are 4 early drawings which just sketch out some of these definitions in a much looser way. And you see how he then decided to make this so dense and really so compact from a drawing that was lovely and funny in the beginning, but then something that really becomes a Sendak. And Stefania, do you want to talk a little bit about the drawings, I think, with this here, because that's another moment where we can really look over his shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish I had all the pictures up here for you to see that we're referring to. But this one in particular, and I'll ask you all to talk about this process that he did. But this I find really fascinating and delightful. There are these fantasy sketches, which is what you're looking at on the left there, that are kind of creative exercises that Jonathan and Lynn will explain. But in this case, this is one from 10 years before Where the Wild Things Are came out, and it, as you can see, really starts to tell that same story. So he kind of starts early with this creative exercise, quickly sketching out a story. And it later, he marinates on it and later becomes something incredibly powerful and special. Do you want to talk about his process a bit?
Oh yeah, Maurice, first of all, he loved music, and if he could have been anything, it would have been a composer. He constantly had music on, and this was part of his exercise with music. He would put a piece of paper down, and he had to draw what was in the piece of music in the time the piece played on the piece of paper. So we have all these really wonderful, he called them fantasy sketches, like probably 100 of them that all through his life that he would do just to keep sort of sharp, and just sort of to compose. Because a picture book is a composition. It's music to him. He felt that a book should be like music, and it should flow and move through as a piece of music does. He couldn't play any music. He unfortunately for him, the only thing he could play was the recorder, which I think everybody can play. But yeah, these are just a really wonderful thing that I think anybody can do. And we had a little girl at the house who came a while ago, and she saw these and she said, "I'm going to go home and do one to Taylor Swift."
Yeah,
like,
there you go.
You go with it for it. So it's a really lovely thing to do. I think we should all do it.
Yeah, one of the things about Maurice, because you hear, he has an art collection, all that, and is this all snobby, but is that there's no hierarchy. He started out in school as doing comics and comic strips, and so the fantasy sketches also are sort of like comic strips, and he loves Walt Disney. And if you go in the house, there's this incredible combination. There'll be, a great print by Goya, but there'll also be Disney toys and that he would play with and show you. The cabinet is sort of just this amazing thing. But when you hung out with Maurice, it's not what mode it was that made it good or bad. He wasn't like, oh, comics are bad or something, but it is all about excellence. It had to be the best of whatever it is. So we learned early on that Mickey Mouse was really good until 1940 or so, and then he changes and he gets all more sort of human-like, I guess, but basically Mickey with pie cuts for eyes is good. And so you see, it was, so as I say, it has to be the best thing for kids, right? He wants it to be the best. And so he would redo and rework drawings. One thing that he would do that I thought was amazing is, when you do a book, it can take years. Outside over there, it took 3 or 4 years, I think, right? And then what sometimes happens is that the first drawing for it, the first finished drawing, doesn't go with the last drawing. And there are examples where he would just, most beautiful picture, he would say, well, it's just not good enough to be with the rest of it. I'm going to redo that one, So, and that's fascinating to see that. He just had an incredible high standard for anything that he did, which ultimately is about you guys. It's because he wants it to be good for people who are going to get it.
I'm thinking about some of the things we left behind at the foundation and had to give up in terms of putting on the wall because there's so much. But some of those earlier higgledy-piggledy-pop drawings come to mind when you're talking about that. Can you talk a little bit more about just Mickey Mouse, but also pop culture in general? I mean, and his childhood and kind of how some of that came to play and came to bear in his artwork, in his books and characters.
You're the art historian.
Oh no, but you're the King Kong.
Yeah, King Kong was King Kong was a big deal for him, and of course Mickey Mouse and Laurel and Hardy and the whole Buster Keaton. He loved movies, and I think that a lot of movies made their way into Maurice's work. Well,
Wizard of Oz,
and yeah, he just really, he didn't have any, like you say, there was no defined definition between pop art and great, what's known as great art.
When I was really young, there was this, in the 70s, there was this huge, and late 60s, there was a huge nostalgia revival, and there were all these movie theaters in New York that were playing old 30s movies. And I remember this so well that there was a Buster Keaton festival, and it was all happening, for the 2 weeks. And we went with Maurice to, when I was 13 or whatever, to see these Buster Keaton movies, which are unbelievably great. I mean, they're just superlative, and how much pleasure that he took in that, and he, things from his childhood had a kind of significance to him, right? Something that he remembered as a child. That was definitely true, and that he would build on for these, works that he was doing.
And just as a kind of some context, Maurice Sendak's parents immigrated from Poland. They were Jewish. They immigrated to Brooklyn and lived in kind of a neighborhood with other immigrant children and families. And that also impacted his world.
Yeah, he used to say that because half the neighborhood was Italian and half was Jewish, that the Italians were the happy Jews, and that he would go over to their houses to eat. So he sort of had this cross culture going on in the house. Yeah.
Because I get these senior, I just remembered that when you come into the exhibition, you see this great Wild Thing head, which is so credible. That really is based on something that Maurice talked about over and over again. When you went to the early Disney movies, cartoons, they began with a huge head of Mickey. So it's doing the wild things, but like Mickey Mouse. And that's, just like, it's so much part of his work. I know this seems idiotic, but I set up that comparison with the Goya and the Fusili, and I'm only realizing now that he completely just copied the owl. It's just exactly the owl, and it's in the print that he owned, So you just see that all the time. He was shameless about sometimes he would actually trace, he had a light box, and he would trace. He also used paint. So it wasn't just the art, he used paint that was the same paint that we use, rich art paint, they used to use in kindergarten. They don't anymore, but they used to use it in kindergarten. So the actual paint of where the wild things are is the most inexpensive commercial paint that he was, I don't know how he was able to do it, Anyway.
Yeah, when you look at it, it's incredible.
I think it was Picasso who said, "I don't invent, I steal." And a lot of artists, of course, of really the greatest artists, they looked back at what other great artists had done, and I don't think this is all is stolen. I think it is put into a different context, and it is almost it becomes a bit more comical than the Goya owl is. The eyes are. The moon, he said, I think in one instances, looks a little bit like his mother, and it's definitely not terribly happy about what's happening here, I would say, from that picture. But he takes these old things, but he really shapes them into his contemporary contect, I think, in a great way.
This is such a perfect example of something you were talking about, because the book itself is a very serious book, and it's a lot about insomnia, which Maurice suffered from. And sleep is the site of the bedroom is both a place where you're comfortable and you want to go to when you don't feel well and everything. And also, as you get older, you realize it's often a site of tremendous anxiety and fear, too. So it oscillates between the two. And it's classic that Maurice is taking something that could be so anxious, and he's making it so funny, which is so healing. I have trouble sleeping, and you get all this stuff now in the news. Oh, well, you shouldn't look at your iPad, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that. Because you're just making it worse, and you'll never go to sleep, and that just makes it not go to sleep. That just makes you worse, makes you feel guilty because you're reading. And instead, this is sort of saying, well, what if that crazy horse was kind of funny and wild, and maybe that owl, look at those eyes and everything. They're not so bad, Right. They're kind of wild and great,
They're a little bit like the wild things.
Yeah.
I mean, they might eat you up because they love you so,
right.
But they are, I think you can conquer them. I mean, that's, of course, the lesson of his books.
He even snuck Night Kitchen in there. I think if you notice the sheet underneath the blue sheet, that's the floor from Night Kitchen. So he put some of that in there too. So he's always going back to other books and kind of bringing them into his whatever he's working. Yeah. So.
I hadn't really put this together until you're just talking now, but there's obviously a window here where these creatures are coming in, and you'll notice in the show, hopefully, that windows are kind of a recurring theme, and windows as a portal in some way to something new and kind of fantastical happening.
Yeah. Most of Maurice's books are about a destination, like outside over there, very far away, where the wild things are. And he does that purposely because it could be anywhere. So it was like Kenny's window is a window, but everything is like looking out at something else.
Right, but you're also sort of potentially staying at home. So, and just I can't help that's the art historian part, but you notice how the Fuseli is all kind of, it's unclear, how enclosed it is, and it kind of, it's a room, but it kind of opens out in a very kind of scary, mysterious way. This is more like a theater set. I mean, it literally has a curtain and the window, and it's held in. So I would argue that the whole formal structure of the picture, again and again in his work, is very soothing in the end. It weaves together. It holds you in place. And that's something that is Sendakian, if you will. I mean, even the cross-hatching, which he loves to do, he even does it with paint. Cross-hatches, it's like a weave. I hate to use that word because it's being used by Donald Trump, but it's very different from the Trumpian weave. It's a weave that is about holding you together, holding things together.
And in terms of windows as a portal, can we talk about kind of the origin perhaps of the window for Maurice? Oh, you're looking at me? Oh, I don't know, whoever wants
Okay,
to.
me?
You know, in terms of childhood and.
You mean, yeah.
Sorry, I was
grandmother.
being very
Thank you
vague.
for reminding me. Yeah,
grandmother
Maurice
story.
told that one of his happiest memories was that he would sit on his grandmother's lap and she would pull the window shade down and then let it go up. And so it was this whole thing about being able to have the surprise of what's coming in. Even, it's funny you said that because I was remembering that Maurice would do the same thing when little kids would come into the house where that Mickey cabinet is. He would keep it all dark. And then as soon as they got in front of it, he'd flip the switch on and they'd all go, ah, they'd all get this really great expression on their face. So it was sort of the same idea that he liked the surprise of what was outside. And I think it's also the fact the windows, I mean, illustrators spend a lot of time alone, in a little room, or maybe it's a big room, but they spend a lot of time looking out. And so it's I think it's sort of a way to get out of your head a little bit.
Well, and then to bring up this other thing, the art history thing, is the whole argument in modernism is that a picture should not be a window, that was a lie. A painting should be absolutely itself, right? And so in a great way, and that wasn't true for so-called, supposedly, old master painting, which are windows onto another world. And so by emphasizing the way the picture itself is a window, the framing that's going on is like the frame of the picture frame. He's really going in the exact opposite direction of what people were saying when he was starting out, what you should do as an artist. So, it's sort of it all comes together.
But I think that's as well very typical for him, that he does what nobody else does at that time. So in the 1950s, where everybody thinks about gesture and bold colors and the silhouette and the coloration is actually separating and things like this, he sits there and does 19th century cross-hatching. And it goes back to a time which is really not what anybody else does at that moment in time. And I think this very unique doing what he thinks is right for him and not so much definitely being inspired by what other people are doing, not somebody who just, looks back in time and is just nostalgic, but really trying out techniques that nobody else does at this moment in time. One thing you just said, and I think that's as well really crucial for almost his whole work, is it's always about the thing you control, the inside, and the look into the outside. And that's maybe things you don't control, and that's maybe new worlds. And in almost all of his books, somebody goes on a quest. So it starts at home, it has an adventure, it goes out, people encounter other things, they encounter other worlds, they learn courage and resilience, and then, like in Where the Wild Things, they're back at home and the food is still warm or hot.
Safe.
Hot, that's very important. The food is still hot, so actually things are going back to where they were with one big difference. They have proved themselves, or they learned something, or they survived in a situation. They were in control, yes.
And that seems to be a really important theme for him in terms of how he related to or approached children about, again, not talking down, and actually acknowledging that childhood is really hard. You're not in control of anything. Fantasy is maybe the one thing you can control, and he never really forgot that, it seems.
Yeah, it's sort of, again and again, there's a kind of search for autonomy, because kids don't, as you say, they don't have control. So what can they control? Their imagination, and you see kids. And then also, the relationship between parent and kids in terms of, how you go out in the world and you want to be yourself, but you still want your mother to love you, right? Yeah. And so the incredible thing about a book like Where the Wild Things Are, which was very different from other children's books at the time, is it doesn't have any clear moral in the usual sense. Max doesn't become a better person, particularly at the end, but he is sort of an artist, right? He entertains the wild things, and he comes back, and his mother still loves him, and that's a recurring theme also. How to, and it, this is a way that Eugene Glynn, who was a psychiatrist, and his expertise was adolescent psychology, and that is the big issue with teenagers, right? Is how can they be themselves but still stay connected to their parents? Gene used to talk a lot about that, and it's moving to me that they both were all about kids. But the other thing, though, that we want to try to bring out, and I think the book which is both of ours favorite, and we think it was Maurice's favorite, which is the book Higgly Piggledy Pop, which again is about a journey, a dog who has everything but goes out into the world to sort of find that there must be something more to life. I always say, that's not really a question that a little child asks, there must be more to life. I mean, or let's say if you have a little 4-year-old who's worried about that, thinks that, it's all jaded and everything, and thinks that, that's a grown-up question, right? That's a grown-up question of somebody who's just won the Caldecott Prize and is worldwide, and is in the newspapers and magazines and interviewed and everything, and still feels dissatisfied, still feels like with all that fame, they must be more like Peggy Lee. There's got to be, is that all there is, right? And then Maurice, and it's also about his dog dying and his mother dying. So he's dealing with these incredibly important things that adults need to deal with. And he does it with such generosity that this is a book that I always give to my friends when not just they've lost a dear pet, but if they've lost anyone, because it is the most comforting book about the afterlife, really, what happens when you die. And it's hilariously funny also.
And it's also one of the books I just want to mention that we're in the process of. We work really closely with HarperCollins, is a great partner of ours, and they are going through, and we are recreating, remastering all of Maurice's original artwork, which is why I'm so nervous that Wild Things is all here. But so we go back to all the originals. We have these really wonderful people working with us who are masters at recreating the files, Steven Steinhauer and Elvira Piedra. And they go in and sometimes they'll have to take the acid look of the paper out so that Max's suit is actually the color of the paper, which is supposed to be white. And we're going back and creating all these new files. The first one we did was In the Night Kitchen. So the new edition of In the Night Kitchen is how Maurice intended it to look. It's vibrant and the line is sharp and it's just gorgeous. We're just doing Higgledy Piggledy Pop next week. We go on press with that and with The Kiss for Little Bear, which is going to look stunning. It's really it's a masterpiece when you see it, how it's supposed to look. So that's our book plug, but I'd like to go back just to Higgledy for a minute. When you go in there and you look at that, and you look at the original artwork, you have to understand that Maurice did that cross-hatching with a dip pen, where you dip the ink in and you cross-hatch, and he could cross-hatch with both hands. So it has this life and feeling to it that I don't think you could get any other way but with an engraving. Engraving?
Etching.
I always get it wrong. These etchings and engravings.
Engraving.
But he would have etchings and engravings on the walls around him, and that's what he was trying to emulate in Higgledy Piggledy Pop, that it had that feel. And in the end, that actually is what a book is. A book is a print. And that's, it goes right back to the whole idea that the book is the actual piece of art. And it's just astounding when you see the control he had. He worked with a magnifying glass, so he'd work very small sometimes, little pictures this big that would then be blown up to be the size for the books. Wild Things is one of the very few books that is actual size. A lot of his later books were small and then blown up, and that also relates to his stage work. He liked to stage when his little drawings were huge. So we had this. When you're doing an exhibition like this and you're sort of in charge of Maurice's legacy and making sure that, honestly, that it doesn't get screwed over, you have to have a great partner like Christoph here, because like many other museums Maurice's works have been in, they've wanted to blow up Wild Things, 800 feet and have it all over their walls and have like an immersive experience. And we said, well, no, you can only blow up the work that Maurice blew up, which was the theater work. So, and he stuck to that. So it's like, this is really, I can't say how, I mean, it sounds like we're sucking up to you, but this is really an amazing exhibit. So
Right. Well,
I'll let you go on.
Right. Just to say the same thing, but one thing to do when you go through this show, because not to put down other art kinds of art. I'm a painter, so I believe in painting. But if you go through this show and take a moment to look at how other people are interacting with the work, it's really amazing. People are coming here who, grandparents who read this to their little grandchildren. People are remembering their own childhood and having the books read to them. And there's a kind of physical relationship to the work that you don't normally see in fancy art exhibitions, And the exhibit has been created in such a way, it seems to me, to make that, to have confidence that people are willing to go in and look at a small thing and see in a small thing the entire world, which is really what he does. A painting can be a picture can be this small, but it can have the whole universe in it. And, by the way, William Blake kind of said that. He said in a famous poem that in your palm of your hand is the universe, the world, or something like that. I'm probably killing his poetry, but basic idea, Maurice really believed. You don't have to do a gigantic painting that's 8 feet. And it's a great thing for young people to realize this, because I used to teach at RISD, and they had a big convention center where all the graduate students would show all their work, and there'd be all these painters, and they would take up the maximum amount of space that they could, and then all their paintings looked the same, and there would always be one artist who was really smart and would have like tiny little pictures, and everybody would go to the tiny little pictures because they stood out, right? Same thing with Maurice, right? You don't have to be original. You just have to be different, which is a big difference, right? Yeah.
I think that's very interesting when you look a little bit into the production of these books, that he starts with these tiny dummies, where you would think as well that maybe in the ideation phase, or when you lay out something, you go big and then you decide maybe what direction you go. But he always starts with these very small, almost matchbox size dummies for the books, and does them then so meticulously and so precise that he has to work with a magnifying glass often, right?
I'm getting the signal that we're getting close, so I wanted to kind of wrap up with a question about Maurice's legacy and the work that the foundation does and the fellowship and all of that, and kind of we'll bring up special guests. Yeah, let's bring up Sergio Ruzzier, who, sorry, I probably butchered your name. Ruzzier.
About 3 years before Maurice died,
Let's get Sergio.
Oh, Sergio.
Yeah, I did get his name right. I did take Italian. I just
Sergio Ruzzier. No, Ruzzier. I can't even pronounce his name, and I've known him for a long time.
I'm the only one who was allowed to say it correctly. It's Ruzzier.
There you go. Okay, Sergio.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Sergio.
Well, anyway, Donna Ann McAdams is in the audience here. About 3 years before Maurice passed away, maybe 4 years, he said, I really want to teach, and he was old, so he wanted people to come to him. So I was up at Donna's, and Donna has a goat farm, and I just out of the blue, I said, you've started art programs too, and she said, yeah, and I said, well, Maurice wants to have a program where illustrators come into the house and they live with him for a month, and they mentor each other, and he gets to talk to them and talk about books and art and music. And she said, oh yeah, I can do that. So she called up Maurice, and then we put together this program where 4 illustrators would come and they would stay for a month, which is what you did. We had a house next door that they stayed in, because he really didn't want you in the house, but he did come in the house, yeah. But anyway, he loved it. And were you the year that he asked you to read Moby Dick, or was that a different year? That was a different year. But he would often try to bring something up to bring them all together. One year, they all had to read Moby Dick before they came so he could talk to them about Moby Dick because he loved Herman Melville. So, so a little bit of the Farm Fellowship was really selfish. He wanted people to come in and have company. But as it turned out, it became this really wonderful sort of mutual educational thing between the fellows and Maurice. And Sergio was in our second year, and he's still here. He survived.
So I survived it.
So why don't you say a little bit about...
Yeah, just to give an idea of how important and extraordinary this experience has been for me is that when I was a little kid, I grew up in Italy. I was born and grew up in Milan. And when I was a kid, I didn't have many books for some reason, even though my father's library was huge, but there were not many children's books in my home, but there were a few, and 5 of them were the Little Bear books that, of course, published in Italian, and those books were really my love. Like I always had them in my hands, and so I learned to read on those books, and then later on, when I started to draw with pen and ink, I used them as a reference. I used them to see how an accomplished artist would draw, and I would notice the differences between one book and the other. Between the first one, Little Bear, and the last one, A Kiss for Little Bear, there is a huge difference in the way he uses pen and ink. So it really helped me. And then Maurice's books were not very popular in Italy, besides Where the Wild Things Are, until much more recently. So when I was a kid, I had Little Bear. I knew about Where the Wild Things Are. But then when I was a teenager and I would go through the used bookstores around Milan, there was actually one church, I don't know what kind of confession, a Protestant church in the center of Milan, where around Thanksgiving, they would do a book sale of old books that I guess American and English people who lived in Milan would bring. And I would look for American and English children's books, and often I would find Maurice books. And I remember I bought Mr. Rabbit and the Lovely Present. I bought Pierre of the National Library and other books. And so I was really like using Maurice's books to learn. Same way I didn't go to school, I didn't go to art school at all. So I was, besides reading comics and looking at all frescoes and Italian, pre-Renaissance paintings and all of that, I learned from picture books, and a lot of it was Maurice's books. Then, when in my 20s, I moved from Milan to New York City. I started to be an illustrator, first for magazines, and then I started to do children's books. And it was with a huge surprise that one day I found in the actual mailbox a letter from the Sendak Foundation, and before opening it, I said, okay, they were probably asking for money for some charity, and I opened it, it was actually an invitation. So I didn't even know that this fellowship existed, because it had started 1 year before. It's not something that you could apply for, or you could, it was just out of the blue, this letter came.
We wanted it to be sort of like Willy Wonka getting the golden ticket. And there are people that weren't usually, some people were successful. You were a very successful illustrator.
I was not, actually.
Well, you fooled us, but because actually my son Nick picked you, and you didn't even know who picked you, but my son picked him because he saw one of his books in a bookstore. And often we would pick people that we just thought weren't going to be crazy and kill Maurice.
Right. Yeah, I didn't succeed. But no, it was a huge surprise for me. I was really, and at first I said, I cannot do this thing. I had a young daughter. I was divorced. So I was like, how can I? What do I? At the end, I found a way, and I was able to be there for a month and get to know him. And the wonderful thing about Maurice is that he was really like a little kid for many things. We were talking about his collections. He was very generous with his collection. He would just ask you to take it, open it, look at it. He didn't have any fear that we would damage the stuff that like the most important thing is to play with these toys, you know. The toys being maybe, you know, antique prints, or he had a beautiful collection of the books of Lothar Meggendorfer, which was who was a wonderful German illustrator from the 19th century that Maurice collected. I think he had all of his movable books. They were amazing, delicate books that were handmade practically in the 19th century. And he would we were like all delicate, we were trying, I say we because it was 4 of us at the same time, Ali Barrampur, Denise Saldutti, and friend Preston Gannon, and me. And so we were all delicate, all afraid to damage it. And he said, well, come on, pull it, look how it moves. And it was really like, he was very generous. It was, at that time when we met him, he was also quite melancholic because a good friend of his recently had died. And so sometimes he would be gloomy, and rightfully so, understandably so. But that kind of brought me back also to my first experience with his work, because if you read Little Bear, at least to me, it's a very melancholic book, especially the story of the birthday cake. When I was, and still, it gave me such a beautiful, comfortable sadness. That book that comes mostly from Maurice's drawings. The text was not his; it was by Elsie Minarik. So it was really nice to find in Maurice, in the person, the same things that I have experienced as a kid, as a reader of his books.
I think I thank you so much, Sergio and Lynn and Jonathan and Christoph. I think we're opening up the floor to questions for, I don't know how long, but Maggie over there has a microphone if anybody has a question. Yeah, Maggie's coming.
Thank you so much for being here. I lived in Ridgefield from 1970 to 2000. One thing that Ridgefield had was a group of cartoonists as well, and they would meet weekly, national cartoonists. Did Maurice ever associate with them, or who did he socialize and associate with?
Well, Maurice suffered from severe anxiety and depression, and he really didn't like to go out of the house. He did know Roz Chast, who was there in town. Mostly people came to him, but he would talk to people on the phone. We should say that his depression was debilitating. He learned at an early stage in his career, if he was working on a book, he knew he would get severely depressed when it was done, so he would start another book. So Maurice was constantly working. He would start a book, and then 2 months before it was done, he would start another book. And when he did the operas, he was doing books, and he did 15 operas in the span of 10 years. So he had to work. He had to keep going. Yeah. So he really didn't socialize. He didn't. He maybe went to Ridgefield to the store maybe 3 or 4 times, in the whole time we lived there.
I mean, it's kind of paradoxical because he was this incredible collaborator, and I think his way of often socializing involved art or work. I was thinking, though, when you were saying about the melancholy, when he was younger, he had this extraordinary editor, Ursula Nordstrom, and she's the editor for Charlotte's Web and for Harriet the Spy. And if you think of a lot of the people that she worked with, who in those days, when Maurice was younger, he was friends with people in the Circle of the Village Voice and Tommy Ungerer and what were we talking? Jules Pfeiffer. Yeah. You think about all these different writers, and the way they dealt with children's books is that all of their books, even he wasn't close friends. He did know Dr. Seuss later. They all deal with really complex emotional situations, and both Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little are extremely melancholy books, and yet children love them because guess what? Childhood isn't this sort of fantasy that grown-ups make and of a paradise where kids are, it's all happiness and joy. Would they be crying all the time if it was like that, right? They deal with sadness. They have to deal with all, Mr. Rogers is so good on that subject, right? And obviously Ursula knew that, and Ruth Krauss, and he was mentored by Ruth Krauss. And talk about that.
Yeah, Ursula discovered him when he was doing window designs for F.A.L. Schwartz. He and his brother, you'll see these toys in the show. They went to F.A.L. Schwartz because they both built these little toys. Maurice did all the painting and sculpting, and his brother did all the mechanics. His brother Jack. So they went to the store and they tried to become toy makers. And they said, oh, well, these would be way too expensive to produce, but we're going to hire you to work in our children's department decorating it. So he had done these windows, and Ursula and another, I can't remember who it was, Margaret McElderry maybe, or somebody like that, was walking by, and they saw these beautiful windows, and they went in and asked who did them, and she asked him if he wanted to maybe try illustration. So she first sent him to live with Crockett Johnson, and who did Harold and the Purple Crayon, and Ruth Krauss down in Rowayton, Connecticut, and spend like a summer with them. And they would teach him how to be an artist, how to listen to music and write, and just learn how to learn his skill. And then he started doing the books with her, and it was a really wonderful time to be a picture book maker because you were being nurtured along by your editor, and it was just the most wonderful experience. She was like his second mother, Ursula. He really felt that she was the person for him.
That's me. Oh, behind you. Oh.
Hi, my name is Julia Haddad. And I, too, knew Maurice Sendak through the Rosenbach Museum and Library. And he would call many times on Sunday and just want to talk. And he really didn't know me that well. So I just want to mention the Rosenbach Museum and Library, which was the repository for all of his original work for book illustration from till 2014. And it started in 1968. So for all those many years, the reason why these drawings are here and in such excellent condition is due to the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and the Curator worked there for many, many years. Thank you.
Yeah, Maurice had this wonderful relationship with the Rosenbach. The Rosenbach had, I don't know if they still have it, but they had Herman Melville's bookcase. So when Maurice died, he wanted his books, his Herman Melville books, to go into that bookcase. He had a will that was he didn't intend to leave them any of his original art. He wanted his house to be opened up as a museum so that people could come and see his artwork and his things and learn about picture book making. Unfortunately, we are not zoned to be a museum. We're on a little country road. If you lived in Richfield, you know that. So we're a study center. We're an archive where artists and scholars can come. So that's why having this is such a wonderful experience, because part of the legacy of Maurice is to get his artwork out into the world, into different mediums and different places, and to expose him to different cultures. So it's what we do, and we tried to keep doing it the way he wanted us to do it. So, but yeah. Anybody else?
Sure. Hi, my name is Eric. Been a K-12 educator for a long time, so needless to say, not only did I grow up with those books, but they became part of what I did as a career. However, my father was a secular Jew who grew up in Brooklyn. My mother came from a Jewish family from Austria, and the book I got from my father was In the Night Kitchen. And the book I got from my mother was Der Struwwelpeter, if you're familiar. Two books that speak to children in two very, very different ways. And so my question is, I guess, looking at the two ways that those speak to children, and you talking about speaking to children like they're people. Not everything needs a moral. How did that mindset develop in Maurice? What educational experiences maybe in his youth kind of informed that decision?
Well, I mean, we both can go on
Yeah,
this one,
yeah.
but he, like we say, he did not go to art school. But he, as you said before, he was a very nervous person and a nervous child. His teachers were wonderful. They would give him projects like, okay, if you're having trouble with this test, what you can do is I'll give you a project and you have to illustrate a book in the style of Goya, or do whatever, do Streetcar Named Desire.
Well, that was
Desire.
one of the first.
So it taught him
at the
to
Art
sort
Students League.
to sort of like think out of the box. He claimed that he would often say, well, when I was in like high school, if you talked to me, I would projectile puke all over the place. but I don't think that was actually true, because you can tell from like his yearbook in there that he was actually quite popular. He was the school artist, and he designed the yearbook, and so a
He
lot
was
of the story.
Yo-Yo Joe. He was a
he was
yo-yo
a
champion. I always like to hear that.
They would have that, like, I don't know if any, like, between the double features of the movies, they'd have people come up on the stage and do yo-yos, and there was this contest called Yo-Yo Joe, and he just loved being Yo-Yo Joe.
Right.
So.
I was gonna say that for him, though, he would say, well, the first book that he would be given was Treasure Island, right? I mean, my favorite book, bar none, is Through the Looking Glass by, which is dealing with the most extraordinary ideas. It's a chess game, right? Or Alice in Wonderland, which is this really complicated card game, right? And it's done, and a mathematician, one of the great mathematicians of the 19th century created those books, right? So this sort of idea of, it's this odd place on the shelf, but as people point out that, particularly in American literature, Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain is one of our greatest writers, but his books get put into this, what Maurice sometimes said was being put into kiddie book land, right? Which is complicated because there's nothing wrong with kiddie book land, but it's sometimes a thing that we do that we siphon off, and then it gets really bad if we decide that something that in kiddie book land can't have a naked body in it, or it can't deal with death, or we have to protect kids from this, we have to protect them from that, because how can you, with the internet and television and all the stuff that's going on, you can't put a bubble around a kid, right? So Maurice's idea was you have to tell them the truth, right? And they want to know what's going on, and they already know. Kids are often saving their parents from stuff. I remember that so much when I was little. You don't want to embarrass your parents, or you don't want them to know how much you're hurting. So you would be amazed. The trouble is there's so little communication, what's going on. Or I know this as a teacher, you think that what you're teaching is not getting through at all, and then you meet some kid that you taught 5 years later, and they said, oh, you told me this. And sometimes it's horrifying because you didn't even mean it, right? And it changed their, right? So, and that's scary too, because kids are sponges too. So I know, I don't mean it in this way, oh, you're gonna do irreparable harm to your children because you give them the wrong children's book or something.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, have a little faith that they can. And he used to tell this story too. A parent would say, oh, I love Where the Wild Things Are, and I read it to my kid, and she bursts into tears and hates it, but I keep reading it to her. And he said, why are you reading this? Why are you doing that? Don't read. If they don't like it, they're gonna. Yeah. Or this is another one, famous one. He said he got a letter about how, because he would answer every letter that he would get. And I'm probably getting the story mixed up, but a mother said, oh, you sent this little drawing, and the kid ate it. He liked it so much that he ate it. And Maurice thought that was the greatest compliment, that you would, that you love the book. He would talk about smelling a new, he would do that. When he got a book, he would
came
smell
into the
it.
house, he would take the cover off and feel it and smell it and just examine every part of it. But Maurice had this, I overheard this wonderful conversation, because when they did the Colbert Report, I don't know if any of you saw that, they did this.
Please look it up. It's amazing.
It is. It's all about picture books, and Stephen Colbert creates a picture book, and they filmed it in the house, and they just had this wonderful rapport between the two of them. And afterward, Stephen was like, Maurice, how do you raise a healthy child and make them grow up to be a big good person, and on and on. He went on, and Maurice said, you just love them, and that's it. They do the rest. They know what to do. You just love them.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, and if you go into the exhibition, you're going to see a collaboration with Maurice and Art Spiegelman, and it sort of tells you this whole kind of philosophy of Maurice and children.
Telling the truth.
Yeah, so.
The other thing it's really hard to convey, because you'll see us because we're married, he was really the funniest person that I ever encountered. I mean, it's just very hard to express how mischievous and funny he was. And even if he wasn't a good artist, he would just come into the room and he would just make you laugh. And part of that, in order to make somebody laugh, and you see the best comedians, is often you have to also make them sad. You have to take them to a place they haven't been. And also always sort of be a little, is this really appropriate? A little, edgy and everything. But he was just hilariously funny. So much that when I was a little kid, I mean, I would fall, just on the floor and hold my stomach and laugh and laugh and laugh because he was so funny.
We should probably also say a little more about the Fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
Since we got Mr. Ruzzier here.
We're kind of on our last couple minutes here, so if you want to wrap up
just
with
because
the fellowship.
it still exists, we kept it going, and of course we don't have Maurice, so we bring mentors in that we feel kind of will project the same ideas of Maurice, and they come and they study his artwork. And right now we're trying to build a building on the property where they'll still live again so that they can be close. We recently just had to rent places, but it is life-changing for them. I mean, I don't know about you, but
Yeah,
but
how did it change you?
For the wars, yeah.
Sergio's a bit like Maurice.
Yeah.
It did change. It did change for the better, sure. No, I just had more. I don't know how to say. Okay, the one big change in my way of working on my drawings, on my books, is that now I feel more insecure after, because I feel like Maurice is there, and I cannot. Let's say I cannot deliver a drawing if I'm not 100% sure that it's done the way it should be done. What I'm saying is that I still deliver bad drawings, but at least I feel much guiltier about it. Yeah, I think that's the thing, though. Like, no, okay, this is an art, this is a passion, this is a craft, this is a profession. You have to really be sure that you are doing the best you can. And that's something that I kind of knew before, but being there with Maurice, seeing and especially hearing what he was saying, he was very honest. It was never brutal. It was never. I never felt, but he was very sincere. He was very honest when he would tell you also what he thought of your books or your drawings. And he was equally or even more tough with his own work, by the way. So it was really, he was honest, that's it. And it was very helpful. And then he would feel guilty. He would tell me something about my drawings, and the day after, oh, Sergio, I'm so sorry, I told you that thing, I shouldn't. I said, no, say, this is good. This is like Maurice Sendak is telling me what he thinks about my drawing, whatever he thinks. To me, it's a reason of, learning, growing, or being depressed also at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, I think all the fellows afterwards, it seems like they go out into the world, and then like about a year later, they come back and they say things like, I think Maurice would like this one, So they have Maurice in the back of their mind all the time. Some they never met him.
Yeah. Also, another thing that you were introducing before is the fact that, he was saying he was so lucky to have had such a wonderful editor that helped him grow up, and he was given the freedom to really experience, really experiment, and he knew that in the current children's publishing world, things are not as easy for a creator. So there is much more pressure from the industry side more than the creative side.
But when they realized that picture books make money. Yeah.
Right. It was his fault.
That was his fault, sorry.
It was his fault. Anyway, so he wanted to create, just to make it short, he wanted to create this space where creators of picture books or storytellers would feel in a way protected and free to create whatever their personal stories would.
But also honored, that they are artists, right? They're not just illustrators; they're artists, like other artists.
Artists of the picture book, meaning like telling stories with pictures.
Well, that's a perfect way to wrap up because that's exactly what the exhibition is about. And we hope that you all really enjoy it when you go see it. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.